Indonesia is like a country being founded on a philosophical debate nobody even cared to finish. At one hand, we have a theological ideology of the belief in the one and only God that infringes on others' rights of religious expression. On the other, we have a very problematic unifying slogan of unity in diversity that is historically proven to be fictitious. Hi, my name is Fuad and welcome to my channel where I make philosophy journals in fun video format. In this video, I'm going to discuss the philosophical naivete of two of Indonesia's aforementioned founding ideologies. My goal in this video is to reignite this unfinished philosophical debate. Hopefully, it raises a new generation of critical thinkers that challenge this bothersome philosophical status quo that kept many of us in an ideological chokehold. Before we start the video, just remember that I'm not a scholar of either philosophy nor history. This video also focuses in philosophy first, then history, and the philosophy it touches is more on the analytical philosophy of religion side. And lastly, this thesis is not aimed at an anti-nationalist sentiment. Again, this video comes from the direction of intellectual honesty, not in any way ideological or political. So yeah, let's get philosophical. Pancasila, which is a Sanskrit that translated as 5 principles, is the official state philosophy and the foundational ideology consisting of 5 principles that unify the nation's diverse population. Nowadays, the first principle of Pancasila reads as Ketuhanan Yang Maha Esa, or the beliefs of the one and only God. But there is actually more to this, and to understand it, we have to get back to the times when Indonesia is still preparing itself for independence. Oh my goodness, that is a very cliche YouTube essay talking point. Back in 1944, when Indonesia was under the occupation of Japan, realizing they're losing the war, the occupying Japan promised that the Dutch East Indies would be liberated. Partly on response of this statement, in February 1945, the Japanese 16th Army formed the BPUPK, or Badan Penyelidik Usaha-Usaha Persiapan Kemerdekaan, or Investigating Committee for Preparatory Work for Independence. The committee's task is to draft a constitution, and it consisted of 62 Indonesian members, 47 of whom belonged to the secular nationalists and 15 to the Islamists. From 29th May to 1st June of 1945, the BPUPK came to Jakarta for its first conference. At this conference, Sukarno gave his famous speech in which he introduced the principles of the Pancasila. In this time, the theistic principle of Pancasila only consisted of ketuhanan or divinity. But then, at the urge of Sukarno himself, he set up a smaller group consisting of the BPUPK member to discuss the drafts that the big committee submitted. So, as you probably had guessed, there were tensions among the members, whereas the secularists wanted a secular nation, the Islamists wanted an Islamic nation. Probably, the setup of this smaller group is to resolve this tension without unnecessarily escalating it into open conflicts. The results of this smaller group is then known as the Jakarta Charter, with the relevant point of divinity then added with the obligation to carry out Islamic law for its adherents, which became known as the 7 words. On the second conference of BPUPK, some members expressed the rejection of the 7 words in the Jakarta Charter. They felt that the 7 words in the Jakarta Charter would have large impact on other religions and another local customs within Nusantara. There were also some Muslim members that rejected it, fearing it would lead up to Islamic fanaticism. Eventually, the 7 words would be erased, changed with the beliefs of the one and only God, to the dismay of some of the Islamist members. Anyway, it's not clear the formal history of its alteration, but I guess Hatta, which is my personal Indonesian hero, might have a role in it. In his book, he stated, around the evening of 17th August 1945, an Imperial Japanese Navy officer came up to him and conveyed the news that a Christian nationalist group from eastern Indonesia rejected 7 words because they were considered discriminatory against religious minorities, and they even stated that it would be better to establish their own state outside of the Republic of Indonesia if the 7 words were not repealed. Now, what does the story tell you? To me, it tells a lot of things, but religious convictions is almost none of them. First of all, the principles were there as a part of political maneuver. Now, of course, I don't know what were the founding fathers thinking back then. Were they do this as a practical political maneuver to unite the nation, or was it a reflection of their own personal and communal beliefs? But what I do know is that the principles changed twice. And none of the changes reflected the true state of theism, especially monotheism, but more of a political pressure from socio-religious group. Personally, as a dude who also study history, I understand completely the necessity of all these commotions. I mean, Indonesia is extremely fragmented. It's true for now, and it's certainly true back then. The only unifying characteristics that they could use as a tool is their religious affiliations. The second thing is, I also understand the usefulness and ease of use of religion for your political agendas. You can use the pretext of religion to expand, conquer, subjugate, invade, or to unite, protect, and resist. The next thing is, I also understand that the concept of official state religion is a valid political move. I mean, countries like Malaysia, Brunei, Saudi Arabia, and many others has that. The idea of official state religion is not the problem here. And the last thing is, and probably the most important thing is, the project of Indonesia's independence always overshadowed by the prospect of the return of the Dutch colonials. Of course, the founding fathers have not much choice but to unite the nation as soon as possible so that when the colonizer returned, Indonesia had already united, thus have more military and political leverage to reject the reoccupation of the Dutch. But as a philosopher of religion, I really cannot stand it. First of all, I treat the issue of theism seriously. To me, it's not only a matter of identity or ideology, it's a matter of truth. So, if you put monotheism as one of your foundational principles, the first principle nonetheless means you should already had enough justification that monotheism is true. Yet, as of 2026, there is no single convincing evidence that justifies the theism of being true. Watch my other journal videos to see my arguments. Secondly, the charter of monotheism infringes on many other theism models that were adopted by many religious groups in Indonesia back then. Since the principles were formally established, many non-monotheistic religious groups were being persuaded to adopt monotheism lest they branded as unconstitutional. Just look at the notion of Sanghyang Widiwasa, which is the supreme divine principle in Balinese Hinduism and in Indonesia Hindu theology more broadly. While the name is translated as the divine order or the one supreme God, which consequently profess a monotheistic inclination, if we look at Wikipedia, the article suggests that the name was developed, which means the notion of oneness was not the initial doctrine of the religion, but an evolution of it to fit another necessity. The question is, what kind of necessity that it has to fit into? Well, Wikipedia said that one of its causes is to suit Indonesia's constitutional and legal requirements for the classification of official religions. Now, there is a big if here. If the article is true, the ideology of Indonesia is indeed oppressive against the non-monotheist to the point it forces a significant number of religious minority to reinterpret their core theology to fit the nation's legal requirement. Oh, one more thing. Before joining Indonesia, Timor-Leste were overwhelmingly animistic or adhering to indigenous religion with only 20% of them Catholics. But since they were annexed by Indonesia in a totally not colonial fashion, they were forced to adopt religion that's considered constitutional by their new colonized, overlord. Having no other choices, majority of them selected Roman Catholicism as that's the religion that I suppose quite familiar to them. Nowadays, even after their independence from Indonesia, 99% of the Timorese are Christians. Anyway, I guess it's time to talk about the non-religious here. In recent decade, the International Humanist and Ethical Union, or the IHEU, has criticized the first principle because it does not include a right to atheism. They argued that this enables a culture of repression and official discrimination against atheists and those who does not adhere to the state's official religions. And yeah, as an atheist myself, I can attest to the discriminatory and lack of empathy that I commonly experience here. So that's that. In this part, let's get a little bit deeper in the philosophical department and dive straight into one of the most overlooked questions. But before we continue, this part will be very philosophically heavy and quite sensitive as a topic. So yeah, prepare yourselves. Why should monotheism be the status quo? What's so special about monotheism that it should be the standard theism model in a nation that is pretty much secularistic? Is it because it's true? How true is it compared with models such as polytheism, which is the beliefs of multiple gods? Have we conducted sufficient research at least to warrant the trueness of monotheism over any other theism model? On the other hand, if you pay enough attention, there are several monotheistic models in Indonesia as well. While in the Abrahamics, the monotheist God is understood in a classical theism model, which is all-powerful, all-knowing, and personal God, the monotheist God in Buddhism and Hinduism is more understood as a foundational entity in which all reality based on. It's like a panentheistic God in a sense, in which all things emanate from. Now, the question is, which monotheistic model is the true one? Is it the classical theism model like the Abrahamics or the panentheistic model like the Hindu Buddha? And I'm not trying to be the snitch here, the Hindu Buddha in Indonesia apparently still believe in other deities as well. They are still polytheistic in the most theological sense. If the point of monotheism in Pancasila is supposed to be the belief in one God alone, aren't that made Hindu Buddha's position unconstitutional? Why Indonesia silent in this matter? Are they unequipped to deal with this heavy philosophical and theological topic? Or do they think this is supposed to be a personal matter? Why so? If they care enough to pressure the Hindu Buddha to alter their theology and force the pagans to convert, why do they say nothing about this apparent theological corruption? Or maybe because monotheism is morally superior than the pagans. So one of the justifying narrative about the monotheists that were pushed by my culture growing up is that religion like Islam was morally superior against the pagans or all the religions or belief system in Nusantara. They like to paint a picture that the monotheists brought with them values like justice, equality, humility, and responsibility. This kind of narrative also painted as a way to whitewash Imam Bonjol and his Padri gang in slaughtering, enslaving, and forced converting the people of Minangkabau and of my own people, the Bata, in the First Padri War in 1803 to 1825 CE. Apparently, these genocidal fanatics brought with them a better worldview, which is Islam, specifically the Wahhabi version, which prohibits the locals to do bad things such as gambling and cockfighting. But my question is, how much better do the values of these Abrahamics have, really? And also, what kind of moral justification that the Padres used to justify their enslavements, killing, and forced conversion of the people they subjugated? But suppose I grant you that the rather unpleasant teaching of the Abrahamic religion like Islam came from a misunderstanding, be it contextually or just plain ignorance, making the bad things that the Padre done were not pure Islamic. If so, shouldn't we also grant the local or the adat customs and values the same chance to be understood within the right context? What if the customs of gambling and cockfighting, for example, were a result of misreading or misunderstanding their own scripture? It could be the case, right? I mean, first of all, everyone is susceptible for error. Even the Muslims were wrong for practicing slavery for 1.1 millennia before they eventually banned it in at least these last 2 centuries. And secondly, for all this time, have we, as a nation, ever give them the chance to speak, to tell their stories by their own terms, to give them the same grace as we do when we give the majority religion? No, we don't even bother to treat them seriously, as if their status as a minority is a sign of invalidity, putting aside the fact that centuries before the monotheist came, their values, their customs, and their religion already present here. But okay, let's be more critical. If we really think that the pagan teaching is bad, why don't we pick one Nusantaran pagan teaching and evaluate its moral values? In my homeland of North Sumatra, there is a now recognized pagan religion called Ugamu Malim. This religion originated from the Lake Toba tribe that's situated around the famous Lake Toba. This religion is pretty much like Hindu Bali, who blends animistic tradition and some polytheists believe in many gods, although they believe in one highest god, which is Debata Mulajadi Nabolon. What a cool name. Anyway, the religion has a philosophy which called Poda Hamalimon, which is a guide to life for its adherent. It consists of values such as Malim Parmanganon, which taught us to be hardworking and honest in our everyday work, Malim Pamerengan, which taught us about respect, honor, and politeness, Malim Parhundulan, which taught us about maintaining social harmony, Malim Pangkatayon, which taught us about manner in speaking, and Malim Pardalanon, which taught us about diligence and piety in upholding the religion. Now, tell me, is this a bad teaching? Is it any worse than the monotheists? Well, of course not, right? So, again, to claim that the monotheist is morally superior than the pagans is really a very naive and ultimately unfounded claims. Now, lastly, you might retort by saying that this push to monotheism is actually a good move, as monotheistic religion, especially Islam, is not merely a theology but also a political constitution. Most Islamists here in Indonesia is more than happy to use this narrative that religious law and to some extent caliphate is better to be implemented in Indonesia. I honestly don't really understand what they mean by that. Do they want to overthrow democracy or they wanted more power for their religion? As if being tax-free, being the majority, being prioritized and protected by the nation among many others is not enough for them. But anyway, let's suppose that monotheism is a better foundation because they also have political values within their core teachings. Well, do they have examples of a theocratic monotheistic civilization that's worthy of being emulated? I don't see any, honestly. Now, granted, this part is a political history discussion, one which I'm not really good at, so my analysis might be overtly biased and very undereducated. But then again, my point still stands. You might mention the Islamic Golden Age as the example, but honestly, how much of their reign were based on theocracy and how much by monarchy? And the other thing is, if we really think about it, what kind of government do you think that our old pre-Islamic ancestors were had? I mean, not only they were predominantly monarchy based on polytheistic beliefs, they were also managed to survive. Some even thrived for centuries. If you really think that the monotheistic government were better, just remember, the polytheists also had one. And ironically, the empires that Indonesia were greatly inspired from were exactly just that, polytheistic thalassocracy led by a godly monarch. And no, I won't entertain your reasoning of blasphemy unless you prove that your religion and its theology is true. You cannot use theological reasoning to refute a political system born out of another religion than yours. I don't think God King is a valid political title either. I think it's hilariously silly. But neither do I think Caliphate, Council of Ulama, Papacy, and any other form of religiously inspired form of politics is valid. Again, unless you prove the trueness of your religion first. Now, let's discuss Indonesia's slogan, the unity in diversity, or in Sanskrit language, which officially expressed Bhinneka Tunggal Ika. The slogan was coined by Muhammad Yamin, a poet, historian, and politician of Minangkabau descent, who brought the phrase to the Investigating Committee for Preparatory Work for Independence, or Panitia Persiapan Kemerdekaan Indonesia, or PPKI, a committee successor of BPUPK that was established in August 1945 to transfer authority from the occupying Japanese to Indonesia. The slogan is understood as a symbolic unity of Indonesia, who's undoubtedly diverse in its cultures, regional languages, races, ethnicities, religions, and beliefs. It's quite peculiarly unique and narratively fitting because the slogan is in Sanskrit language, the language that is widely used by Nusantara for millennia. So, in a way, the slogan does not only function as a symbolic unity of the nation, but also the nation embracing its cultural heritage. The original quote Bhinneka Tunggal Ika actually came from an old Javanese poem Kakawin Sutasoma written by Empu Tantular, a famous poet of Javanese literature from the Majapahit Empire back in the 14th century. And this is it in its full stanza. It is said that the well-known Buddha and Shiva are two different substances. They are indeed different, yet how is it possible to recognize their difference in a glance? Since the truth of Jinnah or Buddha and the truth of Shiva is one, they are indeed different, but they are of the same kind, and there is no duality in truth. Now, that's a very cool poetry right there, and it's kind of poetic to use this line as Indonesia's motto. But is it though? I have two problems here. The first one is, not everyone finds this relevant. I mean, what about cultures in Nusantara who does not remember being Hindu nor Buddha, neither ever being colonized by Majapahit? Think of people like Aceh, Central Borneo, and even Papua. Also, what about cultures who embrace another past civilization as their role model? Think of the eastern coast of Sumatra who remembers the Malay more, the Sumbawan with their own sultanates, and the Sulawesi with theirs. Imagine being a Dayak that lived for millennia, that never once contacted the Majapahit alongside their Hindu culture. But then, somewhat in 1945, you have to embrace their vernacular as part of your unity with a civilization that you have very little similarities with. The second problem is, and this is the main problem that I want to tell you. So, the quote originally came from a 700 years old script that written in times of kings and intended as a theological statement. Peculiarly, the quote then used in modern Indonesia as anything but. It is intended to be utilized politically, stripped with all of its theological content. I wonder what that information tells us. Oh, I know. Deception. Hear me out just for a moment. Every meaning of the words altered and every context changed. The original Bhinneka refers to a notion of metaphysical way, a spiritual journey about achieving truth that can be reached in many ways. On the other hand, the Indonesian version refers to, at least, numerous numbers of people from different identity and circumstances. It's socially coded with no metaphysics included. On the other hand, the Tunggal refers to metaphysical oneness, a philosophical monistic ideas about the existence of ultimate truth, some kind of divine being that no matter in what way or what road we took our journey from, we will eventually got there. While the Indonesian version refers to the nation itself. Again, politically coded, stripped from its divinity. If you find it hard to understand this statement, well, my point exactly. The statement meant to be understood within religious context. It's a stuff for philosophers of religion and theologian and not in any way politicians. So, the fact that Indonesia managed to make it political indicates either a smart political maneuver or a naive renegotiation of its original meanings. Realize it or not, the Founding Fathers made a very deceptive move. Now, I'm not saying that the Founding Fathers lied to us. I don't even think that what they did was wrong. Of course, we can alter every meanings to fit our goals. After all, the goal they're having was in so many ways benevolent. If they didn't unite, I don't think Indonesia would have the power to maintain its independence. But still, what would you feel if your religion's teachings are being used for political gains? What would you feel if, for example, the notion of there is no God but God being twisted as a proclamation that there is no other country but your country? Isn't that supposed to be disrespectful toward your religion, if not outright blasphemous? But okay, you might be tempted to ask, so what if it's a deception? We can always be united in our diversity, right? Well, yeah, we can. But the problem is, by acknowledging the deception, consequently, we also acknowledge that the original notion of our unity was at the very best a modern fabrication. By unveiling the deception, we will realize that we really don't have anything to legitimize our unity. So why are we still united? If the notion of unity were never exist, then what united us now? Well, to put it simply, hatred of colonial. I like to imagine Indonesia as a WhatsApp group consisted of 30-something widows of a same man. The group is made by one of the longest and oldest divorcee that ever been with the man. She said that this group is made as a remembrance about the suffering that all of them have when married to that person. And every year they are kept on being told that their whole identity is about being a widow that had their rights stripped away by their ex-husband. Thus, the WhatsApp group serves as a place where they can rise together. Anyway, the philosophical question is being a fellow ex-colonized a valid justification for national unity? Well, I kinda think it is. Being a civilization that's stripped of its resources, having their rights limited, and for decades, even centuries being told that they're at least second class, to suddenly live a free life must felt nauseating. So it makes a lot of sense back then they united under this new national project. But then, is it a viable long-term reason for unity? Well, I don't think so. First of all, realistically speaking, a unity based on shared hatred or any form of negative experience is never good, unless you're Dave Mustaine and Megadeth. It's better if the purpose of the group is rehabilitation, but to keep the group forever, I think it's a very toxic move. We should move on eventually. After all, if the only determining identity that we have is our past colonial experience, it's basically reducing our whole identity into the negativity that's attached to us. This clearly does not at all represent the whole history and deeds of the cultures, such as Aceh with their past mighty military strength, Islamic scholarship, its relationship with the mighty Ottoman, among others. The Malays with its far reach trading activities, vast academic and literary culture, and its dominance of the Malacca Strait. The Bugis with its seafaring ability, commerce, and its military might. The Ternate with its dominance in spice trades that made the Sultanates the economic and trade juggernaut. The Batak with its mysterious Great Panay Kingdom. Just putting it there. And many other individual culture with its own deeds and grand achievements. Achievements that, dare I say, doesn't even surpass by Indonesia nowadays. The other thing is, most of these civilizations have entirely different colonial history. While the Java were already being colonized for 3 decades with relative stability, the Aceh constantly at conflicts with the colonials for almost 5 centuries. This difference of colonial experience would give them much different outlook about how they see themselves nowadays, especially in relation of how Indonesia see itself as. You can't just generalize them all as we're being colonized as if it evokes the same kind of experience. Imagine it in ex-wife terms. While both are ex-wives nominally, the one who experienced more care would view her married life differently than the one who always abused by her ex-husband. Secondly, just like the example that I gave before, Indonesia is extremely diverse, from our culture, our history, our language, and so much more. While for the past 80-something years we could present this diversity as some form of novelty and impressive gimmick, at the end of the day, we should ask ourselves, is it really working though? Are we, as individual cultures, better than before? Is Aceh, Malay, Bugis, Java, Sunda, Batak, Papua a better civilization under Indonesia than when they were independent civilizations? I'll let you decide.
You know, I didn't expect this video to end in a very political note, but I guess that's what you get when your philosophical foundation is deconstruction. Eventually, you wouldn't stop at mere religious deconstruction, you'd also deconstruct everything you know, be it as simple as your ontological status as a being, or as complex as the ontological status of your nation. But I still think this discussion is relevant in both camps. And as someone who cares so much about truth, rationality, and philosophical accountability, I don't see any other way this nation should continue except by continuing the debate until it concluded. As always, the references I have for this video are listed in the description. Thank you guys. I'll see you in the discussion hall.